Again, usually to honor serve Shola the Noct. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here this evening and thank again Joe for the kind invitation. It's a privilege to be here. As Don mentioned in his introduction earlier, I grew up in Dundalk, but I was the son of two primary teachers, one of whom taught in Dundalk and the other who taught in South Armagh. So I spent my first 6 years at the Queen's education in South Armagh, as a result of which I had no Gaeilge, and so my connection with this region is that I came up here to learn my Gaeilge in Lochanure, just down the road, so I still say Chifi me rather than Fechi me, if you excuse the language. Anyway, and as Don also said, my career over the recent decades has been in the research area, and in fact in the past 5 or 6 years I led a biomedical diagnostics institute, an industry academic partnership, and it was really fantastic working in an area where one was developing new technologies for early detection of critical diseases like cancer and cardiovascular disease. So it was a big decision for me to actually go for the presidency at DCU, and I think that's the point I'm making is, and why I did that is because there's a particular satisfaction equivalent to or even beyond dealing with diseases and health, a particular satisfaction in transforming people's lives through education. Transforming the lives of individual students, there's nothing like it. And collectively transforming nations, and I think that's what we're talking about this evening. We're dealing with very high stakes issues because really, in terms of the overall theme of the conference itself, we're talking about the pivotal role of education in that regard. My central thesis this evening is that a high quality education will be central to Ireland's social and economic recovery. Okay? And really, as Mary alluded to, really the quality of the human capital that we mould through a high quality education system is our way out of this. It's our only way out of this. So again, it puts a particular emphasis, it puts a particular moral responsibility on people like myself and others in the education system that we have to deliver, because the future for all of us depends on this. And I would say to you that given the fact that we have hopefully just temporarily lost our economic sovereignty, the only way we can actually address this is through innovation and flexibility. And again, that puts a particular onus on us. And in the issues that I will raise tonight, and I will focus in particular on 5 or 6 key issues that I think require reform and transformation in the education system, these are not issues that we can identify and say we'll fund this, we'll fund that. We have to find innovative ways of dealing creatively with existing resources, or else leveraging unexploited opportunities so that we can deliver the outcome that we require. One of the key messages I'll give, and I think one of the problems that I would identify, is the fact that there is a lack of alignment of objectives along what I would call the continuum of education. And what I mean by you can break it up many ways if you like, but certainly the current thinking on this is looking at early education, early childhood education, primary school, secondary school, third level, fourth level, and all along lifelong learning itself. It is clear to me, and I think if you examine the situation, you'll find that there are many discontinuities and there's a lack of alignment of objectives along the continuum itself. And many of the key problems we're dealing with happen at those transition points where discontinuities occur in our objectives. For example, in the transition from primary level to second level. The primary level to junior cert is not a happy transition, and it does not lead to positive outcomes. And an even more significant one, which I'll emphasise later, is the transition from second level to third level. That is not coherently done. So one of my pleas this evening is for a coherence of approach in the education system. Surely it's not beyond us to look at whatever output point we're talking about, but let's talk about university graduates. It's not beyond us to agree what we're looking from those graduates and to align the objectives of the education system all along the sub-elements preceding that point itself. And through that coherence, one can find additive value. I think the problem is at the moment that without that coherence itself, we're finding destructive interference, to use a physicist's term, and not getting appropriate, efficient and effective use of our resources itself. So say one of the points tonight is about that plea for coherence. And you'll see that diagram here again one or two times throughout my presentation itself. There's a dangerous complacency in Ireland at the moment about the quality of our education system. And one hears uttered again and again about our well-educated young population, and I heard it mentioned and reported in the media from this meeting earlier on this week. And it's uttered so often that there's a tendency for us to believe that this is a permanent fact. Now, Mary pointed to some of the qualities and positives that we have achieved in recent years in difficult circumstances. But I would certainly make the point that there are enough indicators out there, some quantitative, some qualitative, that should give us serious cause for concern. And I'm going to go through some of these. But I think the point is we risk, through this complacency, of sliding down the quality slope to dangerous levels. And given the point I started with is that our future depends on how well we do this. If we fall into this trap of complacency, then we risk ruining it all again. I don't want to become the Morgan Kelly of education, but I do think it is my most important message this evening is to look, and I'm going to focus on these 5 or 6 key issues. What are the indicators of this? First of all, there's some quantitative ones. There's the Pisa Scores. And for those of you not familiar with that, this is the OECD Programme for International Student Assessment. And in particular, the most recently reported ones looked at numeracy and literacy in 15-year-olds. And just to quote the numbers, in the most recently reported ones looking at the transition between 2000 and 2009, so it's very recent, in literacy we fell from 5th to 17th position. In numeracy, it's worse. We fell from 15th to 25th. This is serious. This is very, very serious indeed, particularly for an economy that would pride itself in being a knowledge economy. Our 15-year-olds are sliding dramatically and rapidly down the system. Another indicator that I'm closely aware of from my own personal experience are the deficiencies at the 2nd to 3rd level transition. Let me be very blunt about this. University lecturers, IoT lecturers spend most of first year trying to address the deficits of what emerges into them from 2nd level. And frequently these are students with high points. And you're dealing with numeracy and literacy in particular. You may have seen recently a report from our School of Journalism where we actually have to deal with literacy issues in first year. And these are students with 400 and 500 points. These are not students at the low end. A second issue, and I mentioned it here as well, is the fact that by virtue, and I'll come back to this, the Leaving Cert and CEO points combination, we create students that have very little preponderance of independent thinking, critical analysis. So we spend a lot of first year trying to reprogram the mindset of our students to get them into independent thinking, critical analysis, creative thinking. This is a waste of time and it's a waste of your taxpayers' money, and it means close to 1 year out of the 4 years at university level for 4-year degrees is effectively wasted. And by, I think, appropriate alignment of objectives throughout the system itself, we could overcome this. So these are some of the observations. I hear a lot from employers, and I think this is very important. I mean, ultimately, we want our graduates to get jobs. In my first 12 months, I spent a lot of my time outside the university system talking to CEOs and managing directors of companies who employ our students. And I'm getting a consistent message. And I'm talking about the Googles, the HPs, the Intels, all of these companies that employ PwCs, these companies that employ hundreds, in some cases thousands of our students. They tell us, on the one hand, there's a skills mismatch, and if I take the ICT sector in particular, one of our strongest aspects of our economy, they cannot get enough Irish graduates in the areas of ICT. And the primary reason for that is the lack of mathematics and STEM subjects. STEM, for those of you, again, who are not familiar, science, technology, engineering and maths. It's particularly a maths problem. We are not producing enough students in those areas, and again, you would have heard that earlier this week. But that is a serious problem for our economy, and I'll come back to that later on. The second point is this. Many of our employers, in fact, most of the messages I got were around this fact. They say the quality of our degree programs from a disciplinary perspective are good. However, what employers are looking for are rounded graduates, and I'll come back to this point later on. The demands of society and the workplace are such that rounded graduates are applied using what they're increasingly calling 21st century skills. That is missing. One employer said to me it takes them up to 2 years to get a graduate into a position where they add value to the company. That is not sustainable. So these are key issues which should cause us serious concern about our education system. So in the rest of my presentation, I want to talk about 6 key areas which I believe can be a focus for us in terms of transformation. And I'll focus not only on the problems, but I'll also address the solutions, in many cases trying to either use creatively existing resources or to exploit opportunities that we haven't exploited to date. So the 6 you can see here: the teaching profession, the Leaving Cert and CEO point system, and so on. You see the list. I'm going to go through them one by one now. So let me take the teaching profession, and let me start with a truism. An education system is only as good as its teachers. It is a truism, but it's worth stating. I think we have lost sight of that in Ireland itself, and I think teachers do not have the high esteem that we would like them to have that they had in the past. And I think there's various issues we can address here. It is very much worthwhile looking at the Finnish experience. And let me just say briefly about Finland. In the 70s, Finland had an underperforming education system and a poor agrarian economy. They realised that they had to address the system and that it was urgent for them. And they focused on this very sharply. They realised very quickly that the source of the solution was in the quality of teacher education. And that's where they focused their energy and their input. Now, in Finland, every teacher has a master's degree. It is now one of the most highly esteemed professions, although not the highest paid profession. They are highly trusted by society, and in fact a lot of the assessment happens at teacher level. Their motto was the one I show you there, trust through professionalism. So they focused on the professionalism of their teachers, and they adopted a very strong partnership approach between policymakers, the educators and the enterprise sector. And they encouraged significant collaboration between teachers and gave them time in their teaching week to collaborate, but all the time focusing on the quality of the education experience. And what has been the outcome? They now outrank consistently every other Western country in the Pisa Scores, and are now regarded in Europe as the top of the table for innovation itself. And they're seen as a major success, and I think there are many lessons in terms of scale and focus that we can learn from that Finnish experience. And if I add some more comments to this, and again, it's a lesson learned in Finland, but I think it's one that's in many developed countries with good education systems, that continuing professional development is a key aspect of teacher quality. And one recommendation I would make this evening as well, that CPD should be a condition of ongoing registration. Teachers need to be registered, but it's generally speaking not challenged after the initial registration itself. We can enhance the quality of our teachers if we make it a condition that CPD is an ongoing condition of ongoing registration itself. The second point I'd make is a focus in our education system of a move away from the constructivist to the move away from the direct transmission approach to the constructive approach. And just to explain that to you, the direct transmission is the traditional approach where the teacher explains everything and the student is the passive recipient of knowledge itself. The constructive approach, on the other hand, is where the student is an active participant in the acquisition of knowledge. And it's a much more enriching and positive learning experience itself. But overall, the point I'd make with the teaching profession is I think we need to focus much more in Ireland on education as a discipline and enhancing the quality of education. And I'll make a recommendation at the end on this. Second point I'd make, and I don't want to labour this too much because many of you are very aware of this, the Leaving Cert and CEO point system. If I make a single point on this, it's the single most negative factor in terms of driving counter-educational behaviour in our education system. And hands up, it's owned and run by the university system, the CAO points aspect of this. So only we can do something about it. Even the minister can't change it. We have to do it, and we will. Briefly through the points, emphasis on learning by rote discourages independent thinking, does not produce a rounded education, and in some exams, and those of you with kids have done the Leaving Cert, many of you would have done it yourself, in many cases stamina is more important than intellect. This is not what we want to achieve. A particularly important point I want to make, and it's very important for us that the Minister has actually requested the Presidents of the universities to come back to him very soon with an actual reformation of this point system, and that will happen. I want to share with you some of my thoughts on this itself. It's very important to state that one of the clear flaws in this, and it's not well understood, that the point system as it is not a fair reflection of student performance. And I'll show you directly this in a second. It distorts the choice of student subjects and often the level that they'll choose to go for. They understand, they can, as Mary mentioned earlier on, they're very clever at working out which subjects can give higher grades, what the reward to effort ratio should be. But let me show you some data which we analysed from the 2010 Leaving Cert. And I know it's after dinner and so on, I don't want to give you too many mathematical pieces of information. What you see there is 5 subjects from the Leaving Cert 2010. The numbers of students who did them, how I put in that is the stats are good. These are big numbers, right? The third column is the important point, right? And that shows the percentage of the students getting less than 60 points in that subject. The percentage of students getting less than 60 points in that subject. Okay? Okay? So that's a student, say, getting less than a C3. So then let me ask you this. Let me consider this. Consider a student getting a C3, so getting the 60 points that we award. So if you get 60 points in maths, you have to beat 82% of your cohorts nationally to do that, out of that 46,000. To get a C3 in Irish, you have to beat 70%, right down to English 50%, to geography 40%. You get the same points, but your national ranking changes dramatically. So you might think it would be a much fairer system if you awarded to the student who gets the C3 in each of those subjects those numbers there, 82 for the maths, 40 for the geography, 50 for the English. Because that's truly their national ranking of the subject. That's truly the measure of their performance. And this is what the US uses in their SAT system. They use a national, these are called percentiles. So I would very strongly say that one way of addressing this issue, and there's some significant benefits from them. So anyway, make the point, the points are based on grades are not a consistent indicator of performance. But the ranking percentile, a much fairer indication of relative performance. And the important thing is it's unaffected by marking variations between subjects. It's unaffected by workload variations between subjects, and it awards excellence. It encourages a student to pursue the subject that he or she is best at, because you get your points for your intrinsic performance in that subject itself. So this is one of the points I would make. I would also indicate that we need to get away from the single terminal examination, which is, in many cases, is a stamina test rather than an intellectual test. We can deal with this in terms of an electronic portfolio, and I'm very interested to note that the Minister is introducing this, or planning to introduce it at the junior cert reform level. I think in a recent report, up to 50% of the assessment will be through continuous assessment. This takes huge pressure off the student. I would also recommend that school-based, and it's important that school-based, because it was pointed out clearly to me, if you do it as home-based tests outside the school, then social issues come into play very significantly. School-based online tests for some elements of the issues we want to measure would be very important. Again, distributing the load. And importantly, if we want to stimulate critical thinking and some of these generic skills, assessment is the biggest driver of learning behaviour. Assessment is the biggest driving learning behaviour. If we don't assess it, it won't happen. Okay, so these are some of my own personal recommendations. Professor Tom Collins, my counterpart at NUI Maynooth, is chairing a group within the university presidents, and we're working on developing a submission to the Minister shortly on this issue. Next point, e-learning. Whatever you want to call it, online learning, e-learning, technology-enhanced learning. This is going to transform the nature and, importantly, the business of education over the coming decades, perhaps over the coming decade. Life is going to change in particularly third-level education. It's already happening. It's happening dramatically in some parts of the world, in particular the US. I draw your attention to a book that's emerging in the coming month. Some of you may have heard of Clayton Christensen from Harvard Business School, the person who coined the term disruptive innovation. He's now applying that concept to the education sector itself and pointing out that this is going to change the nature of education itself in many ways, in terms of the resources available, how people spend their time acquiring the information itself, and so on. But you now know that with free courseware from many of the world's most prominent universities, you can access the best lectures in the world, if you want to do so, for free. So the nature of what we deliver as education to our society is going to change. The nature of the educator is going to change. This is very important for a number of reasons. I think one thing that's very obvious to us in the universities, in the IoT sector, the nature of how students access information is changing dramatically. They live in a digital world. I saw a figure in the past week where students spend up to 7 to 8 hours per day in a digital environment. We have to provide new skills to them in terms of assessing the credibility and the quality of information, the sense-making of information. The nature of how you learn. Customised learning is not, personalised learning is not possible. Some of these e-learning systems have so-called cognitive tutors, which adjust how information is delivered to the individual student to match their learning pace. So now the role of the educator is going to change. The educator will become more of a tutor, a mediator, an interpreter, an assistant. So one of my frustrations with the Hunt report that appeared earlier this year, and Miri was a part of the team that actually delivered all the good bits in it, but one of the frustrations did not speak to the fact that in 10 years' time, the nature of a student on any sort of an IoT or a university campus, how that student engages with knowledge, if they're even on the campus, will be dramatically different. The other aspect is for the lifelong learners, the flexibility. People can now learn and study any time, any place. So the physical issues of capacity may well be addressed by this issue as well in terms of, we heard about the capacity issues. This is now going to change things. The global issue of this is we can have our students taking classes from India, from Japan, from China, from Mexico, using this sort of technology in real time. Enterprise has a key role to play here. We will be announcing a major initiative for our university in September, EDCU, in this, where we're embracing this, where the students entering our campus from now on will live in this sort of environment, and I think it's crucial that we pursue this. STEM. If I was to pick the biggest single issue in education in Ireland, it is STEM. STEM is crucial for a knowledge-based economy. It's essential for technological innovation. Just to take one example, over the past decade in the US, the growth in STEM jobs was 3 times the growth of any other form of job. We cannot be serious about talking about a knowledge economy in Ireland without some issue of addressing STEM itself. It's hugely dependent on numeracy, and I would make the strongest point here is the maths issue is not a problem, it's actually a crisis. We have to do something significant with this, and rapidly. It's a multifaceted issue. Issues like bonus points, issues like even project maths, they are essentially band-aids locally. We have to look at this right across the continuum. You have to go in and look at issues at primary level, even at early childhood level, but you have to deal with the issues of out-of-field maths teachers, the numbers of specialist maths teachers, continuing professional development, ongoing conversion of specialists into maths. We have to deal with scalable solutions. Again, we're working in partnership with our colleagues in the primary education, St Patrick's College Drumcondra, NUI Maynooth, in developing such a scalable initiative to present to the ministers as soon as possible. But it's a key issue for us. 21st century skills, I mentioned this already. To deal with the complexities of life and work in the 21st century, we have to start looking at this in a different way. The OECD makes the important statement that there's a paradigm shift away from lifetime employment to lifetime employability. We have to provide new skills for people to address this issue. So we need, as I mentioned earlier, the rounded graduates, the generic skills, as well as the good foundation skills in literacy and numeracy. And this is, again, even in technological spaces, the importance of the humanities. The humanities have a key role to play in actually providing that critical thinking, that analysis, and so on. So you're talking at skills like communication, critical thinking, digital intelligence, the use of digital knowledge, adaptability, innovation. These are the key skills. Here's a quote I often use from the European Commission last January on new skills for new jobs. Dramatic statement. Many of the jobs in 2015 and most of the jobs in 2030 do not currently exist and cannot be foreseen yet. So a student coming into us next September will be graduating in 2015, so that statement applies. Such is the dynamic nature of the external employment environment. We have to address this. So again, we're launching an initiative in late August where we're saying for every student that enters our university from next September, we're saying they will emerge with a good quality degree, but layered on top of that will be these skills. We've rewritten 2,500 plus modules, to give us learning outcomes that map onto these skills. Creative and enterprising mindsets, solution-focused, effective communicators, leaders. These are the skills that society and the workplace is looking for. Final one of the 6 points. We must produce graduates for a global world. We must produce them. Okay? They must compete in a global market. We must prepare them for a multicultural awareness for the global economies. And when we look at the global economies, they're changing rapidly. I make the point to you that more than 2 in 5 of the world's population now either come from India or China, more than 2 in 5. Within the next 15 years, India will become the biggest population in the world. Its annual increase in population is bigger than the population of Australia. That's how dramatic it is. The world's economy is changing. So when I show you this graph, this diagram here, as we look, we must look east and west. We're comfortable looking west. And I think a lot of our engagements have to be with the US, but we're increasingly looking at countries like Mexico and then into South America. But certainly I've prioritised India as a key country, and I know the Minister as well has identified this as a key country in terms of preparing our graduates for a globalised environment. One of the things that I want to finish off with is the point is this. Some of what I'm talking about, it would appear to cost a lot of money. In fact, I would make the point that there are solutions to this. The private sector support has been untapped for education in this country. Just this month, President Obama ran a major business workshop for key business leaders in the UK. And at the end of that there was a commitment of over $100 million to education initiatives in the US, recognising issues like STEM, mathematics and so on. It's in these companies' own interests and in the national interest, and they often contribute to the national interest. If we can leverage that there, we can get significant benefit. Let me give you one example. Microsoft, a company that's very prominent in this country, July 2011 announced a 25 million STEM program in their own state in Washington, and a 15 million R&D investment in e-learning. And what are they doing? Increasing engagement of students through game-based learning, e-portfolios like described earlier on development, and they're training, look at this number here, over 150,000 educators in these technologies. These are not specific to the US, these are generic issues, and I think we can negotiate through these. The companies that President Obama met were the Microsofts, the Intels, the Accentures, companies that are very, very strongly present, and I believe that we can actually leverage that possibility. So my recommendations finish on this. I believe to address the continuum issue and to address the quality of education issue, we should immediately establish an Institute of Education. And again, this is not a new spend. This is actually bringing together existing resources, because we have many experts in education, but all operating independently and in an incoherent fashion. We should focus on aligning the objectives along the continuum, as I mentioned. We should establish a key leadership area in digital pedagogy. E-learning will happen. We can either lead or follow. And we should focus on excellence and innovation in teaching and assessment. I would encourage as well the establishment of a national enterprise education partnership and develop in that partnership a national STEM initiative and a national, excuse the missing end there, I was jumping between national and international, but e-learning leadership. I think we can actually do significant there. Companies will play a part. One CEO of a major household name ICT company told me that within the last 10 years, he went to a government minister, a predecessor of the minister here, and offered a laptop for every student in the country. And 6 months later, he was still dealing with red tape, and he gave up. Okay? He gave up. So I'm now working with people like that, trying to convince them times have changed. We have a new minister, we have a new focus, we can actually do something. But that sort of commitment, Ireland would be a great pilot for e-learning, a fantastic pilot. These companies will join us. And what we do, we have to work across the higher education sector in alliances to enhance the delivery. We cannot operate competitively. We have to operate coherently. Final slide. It's useful to hear from blunt CEOs of successful companies. This is what Craig Barrett said about the Irish education system just last year. In the STEM situation, he says, Ireland needs to be more than just average. He says, state your goal to be #1 in the Pisa rankings and maths and go and do it. He says, you teach by rote and you don't develop skills of critical thinking. Correct. He says, 20 years ago, Intel came to Ireland because Ireland had a blueprint. He says, you need a new blueprint now. Very strong messages, I think, very relevant to us. I'll finish off by thanking you. Sorry if I went on a bit there. I would point out a very excellent reference. Professor Sheila Drudy from UCD, Forming Education, just came out in studies in the past few months. A very significant reference as well. I'd recommend it to you.